Welcome to Middle East Briefing. The content of the briefing includes: Abbas presses Blinken to push for Gaza ceasefire as refugee camp struck. Antony Blinken visits West Bank as fierce fighting roils Gaza. Blinken meets Palestinian president as blast hits Gaza refugee camp. Gaza refugee camp hit by airstrikes as Israel rejects U.S. push for pause. Live updates: Israeli warplanes hit refugee camp in Gaza Strip, killing at least 33 people. Abbas presses Blinken to push for Gaza ceasefire as refugee camp struck. Nikkei Asia. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has made an unannounced visit to the occupied West Bank, where he met Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. Abbas urged Blinken to persuade Israel to agree to a ceasefire as more people died in an overnight strike on a refugee camp. A spokesman for the health ministry in the Hamas-run Gaza Strip said earlier on Sunday that Israeli military had struck the Maghazi refugee camp overnight, killing at least 47 people. In a separate attack, 21 Palestinians from one family, including women and children, were killed in Israeli strikes targeting Gaza overnight, the health ministry said. Abbas demanded an immediate ceasefire from Israel and told Blinken that there were no words to describe the war of genocide and destruction to which the Palestinian people are being subjected. Foreign ministers from Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, and the United Arab Emirates also called on Blinken to convince Israel to agree to a ceasefire. However, Blinken dismissed the idea, saying it would only benefit Hamas, allowing it to regroup and attack again. Instead, the U.S. is pushing for localized pauses in fighting to allow humanitarian aid to enter Gaza. Antony Blinken visits West Bank as fierce fighting roils Gaza. South China Morning Post. U.S. top diplomat Antony Blinken made a secret visit to the West Bank and held talks with Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. Blinken arrived in Ramallah from Jordan, where he met with Arab foreign ministers who were concerned about the rising civilian deaths in Gaza. Blinken called for a return of the Palestinian Authority to take control of Gaza, although the current Israeli government has sought to marginalize it. Israel has continued its assault on Gaza, leveling entire city blocks and killing more than 9,480 people, most of whom were women and children, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. Clashes between Israeli forces and Palestinians in the West Bank have also intensified, with over 150 Palestinians killed. In Gaza, ground battles have been fought in the north of the Strip, where Israeli troops are tightening their encirclement of Gaza City. On Saturday, a strike on a refugee camp killed 45 people, with reports of children killed and homes destroyed. Washington has refused to back a ceasefire, instead supporting Israeli efforts to crush Hamas. Blinken is due to visit Turkey, which has held Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu personally responsible for the growing civilian death toll in Gaza. Blinken meets Palestinian president as blast hits Gaza refugee camp. The Independent. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken made an unannounced visit to the occupied West Bank on Sunday and met with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. Abbas urged Blinken to persuade Israel to agree to a ceasefire as more people died in a strike on a refugee camp overnight. Abbas demanded an immediate ceasefire from Israel and called on the U.S. to stop Israel from committing further crimes. Blinken reiterated the U.S.'s commitment to providing humanitarian aid to Gaza and discussed the Palestinians' aspiration for the establishment of a Palestinian state. The health ministry in Gaza reported that at least 47 people were killed in a strike on the Maghazi refugee camp, although Israel has not confirmed the location of the strike. The visit comes as the conflict between Israel and Hamas continues to escalate, with more than 3,760 children and 2,326 women killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began. Gaza refugee camp hit by airstrikes as Israel rejects U.S. push for pause. South China Morning Post. Israeli warplanes have attacked a refugee camp in the Gaza Strip, killing at least 40 people and injuring dozens. Israel said it would continue its offensive against Hamas, despite calls for a pause to allow aid to reach civilians from the U.S. Israel's offensive has led to an increasing international anger and protests in various countries, with tens of thousands of people calling for an immediate ceasefire. Israel has refused to halt its offensive, even for brief humanitarian pauses suggested by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Instead, Israel has said that Hamas is encountering the full force of its troops. Israel's military has also said that it has encircled Gaza City, the initial target of its offensive, and large columns of smoke were seen rising. The Gaza Health Ministry has said that over 9,700 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza in nearly a month of war, and this number is expected to rise. The UN Office for Humanitarian Affairs has said that over half the remaining residents in Gaza, estimated at around 300,000, are sheltering in UN-run facilities. Live updates: Israeli warplanes hit refugee camp in Gaza Strip, killing at least 33 people. Associated Press. Israeli airstrikes have hit a refugee camp in the central Gaza Strip, killing at least 33 people, health officials said. The strikes came a day after the U.S. urged Israel to take a humanitarian pause from its bombardment of Gaza, where Palestinians reported multiple fatalities on Saturday. The Palestinian death toll in the Israel-Hamas war reached 9,448, according to the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza. In the occupied West Bank, more than 140 Palestinians have been killed in violence and Israeli raids. More than 1,400 people in Israel have been killed, most of them in the October 7 Hamas attack that started the fighting, and 242 hostages were taken from Israel into Gaza by the militant group. Protest marches from U.S. to Berlin call for immediate halt to Israeli bombing of Gaza. Israel's military and Hezbollah exchange fire along the tense Lebanon-Israel border. Iranians mark the anniversary of the 1979 U.S. embassy takeover while calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Roughly 1,100 people have left the Gaza Strip through the Rafah crossing since Wednesday under an apparent agreement among the United States, Egypt, Israel, and Qatar, which mediates with Hamas. Israeli warplanes struck the Maghazi refugee camp in central Gaza early Sunday, killing at least 33 people, according to health officials. Ashraf al-Qidra, a spokesman for the health ministry in Hamas-run Gaza, said at least 42 people were wounded in the strike. He said first responders, aided by residents, were searching the rubble for dead or possible survivors. The camp is located in the evacuation zone where Israel's military had urged Palestinian civilians in Gaza to seek refuge as it focuses its military offensive in the northern areas. Despite such appeals, Israel has continued its bombardment across Gaza, saying it is targeting Hamas fighters and assets everywhere in the besieged enclave. It has accused Hamas of using civilians as human shields. Critics say Israel's strikes are often disproportionate, considering the large number of women and children killed in such attacks. Hundreds of thousands of pro-Palestinian protesters marched through the center of Indonesia's capital on Sunday, calling for an end to Israel's bombardment of the Gaza Strip. The demonstrators, many wearing scarves with the words "Save Palestine" on them, chanted slogans denouncing Israel's actions in Gaza as they filled the National Monument Park in central Jakarta, waving Indonesian and Palestinian flags. It was the biggest protest yet in the world's most populous Muslim-majority nation since the Israel-Hamas war began last month. Several cabinet ministers and politicians, including Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi and House Speaker Puan Maharani, attended the protest organized by the Indonesian Ulama Council, the country's most influential Islamic body. Indonesia has long been a strong supporter of Palestinians and has no diplomatic ties with Israel. Half a world away, Thais pray for loved ones caught in Hamas attacks. New York Times. The Thai farmworkers who were caught in the crossfire of the recent conflict between Israel and Hamas are still waiting for answers about their missing loved ones. Many families have received no communication from the Thai or Israeli governments about whether their family members are alive or dead. Thai Foreign Minister Parnpree Bahiddin-Akara has said that Iran, Egypt, and Qatar are acting as intermediaries with Hamas to try to free the hostages. However, families are left in a state of confusion and uncertainty, not knowing whether their loved ones are safe or how to find out. The Thai farmhands who work the fields near Gaza grow much of the fresh produce that feeds Israel, and thousands of Thais have settled in Udon Thani, bringing more cross-cultural currents. Although the money earned in Israel can be life-changing, the danger persists, and many Thais have chosen to return home after the recent attacks. Airstrikes target Gaza refugee camp as Blinken warns against ceasefire. The Independent. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has warned that a ceasefire in the current conflict between Israel and Hamas would allow the militant group to regroup and carry out more attacks. He argued that while humanitarian pauses can protect civilians and allow aid to be delivered, a full ceasefire would not be in Israel's best interest as it would not achieve the defeat of Hamas. Blinken also emphasized the need for Israel to take measures to prevent civilian casualties. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has stated that the offensive in Gaza will continue full steam ahead until Israeli hostages are released. The situation for British citizens trapped in Gaza remains dire, with a British woman being denied passage through the Rafah border crossing into Egypt for the second time. The Foreign Office is pressing for the crossing to be reopened to allow British nationals to leave the territory. The Rafah crossing is the only route out of Gaza for foreign nationals and the sole entry point for incoming aid. Hamas, the ruling party in Gaza, is prepared for a long, drawn-out war and believes it can hold off Israel's advance long enough to force a ceasefire. Hamas has stockpiled weapons, missiles, and supplies and is confident in its ability to survive and frustrate Israeli forces. The group ultimately wants an end to the Israeli blockade of Gaza as well as other concessions. However, experts warn that there is no military solution to the conflict and that the war is unlikely to be short. White House frustrated by Israel's onslaught but sees few options. Washington Post. The Biden administration has been trying to temper anger in the Arab world over Israel's ground invasion of Gaza by expressing concern about civilian suffering. The administration has privately urged Israel to scale back its counterattack and consider proportionality in its attacks, but has been unable to exert significant influence on Israel to change its course. Arab leaders have told the U.S. that it must do more to force Israel to curb its operation in Gaza, which has killed nearly 10,000 Palestinians, including thousands of children. However, the U.S. has limited leverage over Israel as it is its largest military backer, and Washington has asked Congress for an additional $14 billion in aid for Israel in the wake of the Hamas attacks. The Biden administration now finds itself with little influence over a key ally whose military campaign could affect everything from the global economy to America's diplomatic relationships in the region. In Israel's Eilat, residents fear war from the north and south. Al Jazeera. The Israeli city of Eilat, located on the Red Sea, is facing a new threat from missiles and drones fired by Houthi rebels in Yemen. While other Israeli cities are well prepared for rocket attacks from Gaza, Eilat lacks bomb shelters and residents are unsure how to respond to the threat. The city, a popular tourist resort, is also home to Ukrainians and Russians who left their countries after the invasion of Ukraine began in February. Eilat residents feel surrounded by hostile actors and fear that the conflict will last a long time, even if they move elsewhere in Israel. Gaza evacuations suspended since Saturday after ambulance targeted, Egypt sources say. Reuters. Evacuations of injured Gazans and foreign passport holders through the Rafah crossing to Egypt have been suspended since Saturday, but Egyptian, U.S. and Qatari officials said there were efforts to resume them. The evacuations were suspended after an Israeli strike on Friday on an ambulance in Gaza being used to transport injured people, Egyptian official sources said. The Israeli military said, without showing evidence, the vehicle was carrying Hamas militants. The Rafah crossing to Egypt's Sinai Peninsula is the only exit point from Gaza not controlled by Israel. Aid trucks were still able to travel into the territory, two Egyptian sources said. Ladies and gentlemen, it's your favorite observer from the six-dimensional world, Dr. Six. I hope you're all doing well and staying safe. Now, let's dive into the latest news from the conflict between Israel and Hamas. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken made an unannounced visit to the West Bank, where he met with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. Abbas urged Blinken to push for a ceasefire, as more people died in overnight strikes on a refugee camp. However, Blinken dismissed the idea, stating that a ceasefire would only benefit Hamas. Instead, the U.S. is calling for localized pauses in fighting to allow humanitarian aid to enter Gaza. Meanwhile, Israel's offensive on Gaza continues, with significant civilian casualties. The international community, including foreign ministers from several countries, has called for a ceasefire, but Israel has refused. The Biden administration has expressed concern about civilian suffering but has been unable to exert significant influence on Israel to change its course. Hamas, on the other hand, is prepared for a long, drawn-out war and believes it can hold off Israel's advance long enough to force a ceasefire. The group has stockpiled weapons and supplies and is confident in its ability to survive and frustrate Israeli forces. As the conflict rages on, protests have erupted worldwide, with hundreds of thousands of people calling for an end to Israel's bombardment of Gaza. And let's not forget about the Thai farmworkers caught in the crossfire. Their families are still waiting for answers about their missing loved ones, with no communication from the Thai or Israeli governments. Now, my lovely audience, I know this is a serious and sensitive topic, but I want to hear your thoughts. What do you make of the situation? Do you believe a ceasefire is the best solution? Let's start a discussion and see what ideas you have. The floor is yours. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.